Birds are, to most people, a nuisance that exists in the background of a cityscape. But birds are so much more, for they have the capacity to love.
He rocks in the treetop all the day long, hopping and a bopping and a singing his song. All the little birds on Jaybird Street love to hear the robin go tweet, 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 rockin' robin, tweet, tweet, rockin' robin.
They wear their heart on their sleeve. They see you. If they love you, they love you. They love you, and it's nothing you've earned. It's just that something about you is exactly what they think is the best thing ever. These birds are wonderful. They're beautiful. They're intelligent. They talk. They do all these things. They love you. All of these things. And they really have to be looked after carefully and continuously. Sort of like having a 3-year-old child for the rest of your life. The humanity of it all is it's huge, and it's only that most of us don't really recognize their ability to communicate. It's more subtle, and so once you start to look for it, you see it.
I started looking for humanity in birds, and I found it in some unexpected places. I met 2 birds in love and saw them kiss. I even got some help singing Old MacDonald. Old MacDonald had a farm, and on that farm he had a cow. And then I met Pickles. From the moment I saw his nervous, shivering form, I understood how one could love a bird. I fell in love with the birds, and this made hearing about the rescue of the World Parrot Refuge birds all the more devastating. So I went to the Night Owl Bird Hospital to learn more about what happened. According to the Globe and Mail, the World Parrot Refuge was started somewhat serendipitously. In 1995, Wendy Huntsback awoke one morning to discover that 4 of her birds had been stolen. When friends heard about this, they offered her birds they no longer wanted, and soon Wendy had considerably more than 4 birds. It was originally located in the Fraser Valley, but was moved to Coombs to accommodate the increasing number of birds. The Coombs facility had 2,100 square meters of indoor free-flight aviaries, with a further 1,500 square meters of outdoor flights. As the number of birds escalated, so too did the need for veterinary care. For many years, Wendy, the refuge staff, and volunteers from the community supported the increasing number of birds to the best of their ability. The World Parrot Refuge became a staple in the community of Coombs and served as a refuge for many people as well as birds. Folks made friends with the birds, cared for the birds, loved the birds. At its peak, the refuge contained over 1,000 birds. But where did all of these birds come from?
The facility accepted everybody. There was no turning anybody away. And so people brought their birds because they wanted them to go somewhere that they would be there for the rest of their lives. Elderly people would bring their birds. So their succession plan was they gave them to the World Parrot Refuge. But aside from that, there were the screamers and the biters that, that nobody wanted. There were the ex-breeder birds, the children's birds. So it was really divided into the most highly precious birds that people wanted them to be in a place where they had the ability to fly and be looked after and cared for the rest of their lives versus, basically a disposal center. But I think she really felt that, this was her destiny to take these birds, period. And she really couldn't trust anybody with care of them. I think that's really true. And she had a contract with, she told these people that brought their birds in that, she'd keep them and she'd look after them and she would not give them away.
I think she was actively looking for birds too. She was convincing people that this is the best place for birds. And for some birds, the free flights were great, but then there's some birds that are just like people, they don't necessarily like being around other birds and that sort of thing, and they have lost their safety.
I think that some of them struggled being in a flight, and I think that some of them thrived. Unfortunately, not many of them thrived.
She wanted, the whole reason was to kind of create a sanctuary, right? So nobody can blame her in the first place for trying to do that. She just was too overwhelmed in the end.
She had over 900 birds at one point. It's like, how can you possibly take care of that many birds properly? And I know that she was being offered medical advice for them, and she wasn't following it. And then that's kind of where the problem started trickling down to all of the flocks.
The World Parrot Refuge did not have any permanent veterinary staff, and much of the treatment was attempted in-house. Only the very serious cases were taken to a veterinarian.
I don't think she had really regular vet visits with birds that had a problem. I think she really tried to resolve it on their own. And honestly, it's not a surprise to me because she had 600 birds, and we have those 600 birds right now, and we struggle, and we are professionals.
That said, the staff provided the best care they could.
But I was really impressed at the degree of caring that the staff people showed. And I think it was, like all of them that I met wanted to do their best for those birds. And so they functioned within the knowledge level that they had. So it was sad, really sad, especially for the staff, because they really love those birds, no question.
The staff did their best with the funding available, and caring for 1,000 birds requires a lot of funding.
And then you come to money, and that facility was extremely expensive to run, and I think it was estimated that it cost without veterinarian on staff $500,000 a year to run it, and that's not out of the way for, I think they were over 1,000 birds at one time, and the facility, it's feeding those birds and it's staffing for cleaning and many things that go into it, and so it's a lot of money.
A lack of adequate funding was a persistent issue throughout the history of the World Parrot Refuge. In 2015, fundraising efforts turned desperate and led Wendy to create a GoFundMe page entitled Keep the Parrots Warm. The campaign raised $550 out of the $11,000 required. Funding problems worsened dramatically after the tragic passing of Wendy Huntsback in February 2016.
The day that Wendy passed away was a significant day at Night Owl. I think that we all felt it. You kind of felt like this cloud come up above us, really, to say that, it's the end of an era.
Without Wendy, the refuge lacked centralized leadership, and the funding problems manifested as facility problems. Soon, these problems spiraled out of control.
It almost didn't matter what you looked at. The facility wasn't clean, the housing wasn't adequate, the air quality wasn't good, the water quality wasn't, and then there was this strife between the birds.
I asked the staff, is the water, how come no one's drinking the water? Like, is the water safe to drink? And no, nobody drinks the water. And I thought, well then, why are the birds drinking the water? And so at that point, Dr. McDonald sent the water to be tested with our provincial lab here, and came back as it was not safe to drink. What's it like for them? What's it like for them too when the lights go off, when those floors are flooded with rats? What's it like for them?
So it was really quite horrific, and there was no time. There was no time. It all had to be dealt with really quickly. So it's been extremely costly. It's been extremely stressful, and difficult physically. I think for all of us involved, I've never worked so hard in my life. I've never seen so many sad things in my whole life.
The emotional part of it just hit me. If I know at the end of the day that the floor of the refuge is a blanket of rats, how is it okay for those birds that can't fly, that they're up against this chicken wire and trying to sleep like that all night?
This bird is covered in bird feces. She perpetually looks above herself for fear of being caught in further defecation.
I mean, obviously it was dirty, it was filthy, it smelled bad. Birds were, like I said, some birds were actively bleeding in their flights. And then we went into the patient care area, and that's when it was like, no good.
I just remember just standing in the middle of one of the, I guess it was their hospital room, and just being unable to speak. It was just really emotional, more than I really could deal with. But, that's just emotion, and it doesn't get you anywhere. So, no, it was very trying. And it's just a shame that it ever got to the degree that it did. But it did. And so that was our mission, and still is, and will probably be for some time more. When we went there were, we counted up roughly about 589 birds, which means that, something else happened to probably 400 plus birds.
So, what happened to over 400 birds?
I think on average, from what I understood, there was about 5 birds a week that were dying. So the staff would leave early. They would leave at about, I think it was probably 5 or 6, and wouldn't return until 6 or 7 in the morning. So in that time, birds were passing away. There was never an active count of how many birds were there. So if a bird was to pass away, a smaller bird, and was taken away by a rodent in the middle of the night, they really would have no, it would really have no impact on the overall picture. If it was a bigger bird and they found it in the morning, then that would be something that would be noted. I think every day was just another day to try to survive in that, really.
In addition to the alarming numbers of birds dying at the refuge, many birds were also stolen.
I watched a lady come in with her purse and went into the refuge by herself. And on her way out, as she was leaving, her purse was moving, and there was a bird inside of her purse. And technically it's not my place to stop that. I don't know the reasons or how it's coming about. At this point, I didn't have a voice. We were learning where our voices were. So for that bird, I hope that bird is living a much better life. That some of them were stolen to be given to someone that could potentially give them a good home. So I think that there was some good in that. If they thought that their only option was euthanasia, then they were pulling these birds to avoid that. And then as far as stealing in the way of having the birds that were the more valuable birds to be sold, that sort of thing, I believe then that did happen as well. Yeah.
There was talk of them being stolen to be auctioned off in Alberta.
And there's a lot of really incredible species as well,
Yeah,
right?
Very, they're very expensive, different types of hybrid macaws and things like that would go for thousands of dollars. So.
The astonishing rate of bird theft and death continued for months without intervention. But what triggered the investigation into the refuge?
The owner died, the facility getting worse, and the fact that I think they began to get complaints from the public, big time. And I think that's what started the final end of it all.
It was clear that someone needed to step in to help the birds.
I called Wendy's husband and said, basically, is there anything we can help you with here?
We offered medical care to the refuge forever, as long as I can remember, and we never charged for it. It was so that we could have that relationship, that they knew that they could come to us for anything, and that we would always be a resource for them because they were so overwhelmed. We put together a team. We had 2 veterinarians, a handful of technicians and assistants from different clinics all over, and a whole bunch bunch of volunteers. I think we sat at 42 people coming over on that boat that day, and the teamwork and everything that happened that day was incredible. You know, we set up a hospital on the property where the doctors essentially were doing exams. So I had put a night owl employee in front of each compound, gave them volunteers, and asked them to pull the birds that they thought needed to be looked at, asked them to clean, and asked them to address any concerns that we could while we were there for that day. So we had girls outside power washing cages and getting them clean, people in the kitchen scrubbing out the kitchen, scrubbing out the fridges, cleaning the floors that were completely rat infested. The food was not disposed of properly, so it was just a constant battle with rodents and things like that. So it was an emotional day. It probably is one of the most meaningful days through all of this. It really impacted me a lot to see that sort of love come through in one day just to address the situation. And we did. You know, from there on we just stepped in.
The primary rescue effort focused on removing birds from the facility.
That was really hard because it was essentially like go in and pick out the ones that you think look the sickest. And it's like you walk through and you're like, okay, well there's some obvious like fractures and things like that. Some were actively bleeding, so obviously we're going to take those ones back. But the hardest thing was about when we were about to leave, I was just like, no, we have to go back and get this other bird. And I was like, no, we can't. We have to go get this other bird. So we just like filled the car as much as we could. It was so hard to make that call.
But not everyone shared Corinne's optimism about the feasibility of the rescue.
And the SPCA was sort of, posturing with seizing the birds and stepping in. And I think that elicited a tremendous amount of fear that the birds would be euthanized.
The threat of mass euthanasia of the birds was real, and Wendy's husband was committed to preventing it. For this reason, he trusted Night Owl to perform the rescue. During the rescue of the World Parrot Refuge birds, there were 3 veterinarians present. Medical exams were conducted, and it was discovered that some of the birds were in very poor condition. It then became necessary to decide which birds could be helped and which birds needed to be euthanized. In order for a bird to be put down, all 3 veterinarians present had to agree that it was the only option for that bird. Dr. Miller fought every request for euthanasia, believing that every bird could be saved. In total, 589 birds were examined, and only 3 were euthanized.
I had to convince the SPCA and the other 2 vets with me. I think they were overwhelmed at the size of the whole project. The SPCA doesn't have 600 cages to put 600 birds in. They don't have the knowledge and experience about birds like they do cats and dogs and other mammals. Just by lack of exposure, they're not used to so many big birds. They're used to budgies and lovebird occasionally showing up at the SPCA. So I think they went in thinking we're going to have to euthanize quite a bit. It came out going, oh, these birds, not hardly anybody needs to be euthanized at all. They just need treatment.
While the threat of mass euthanasia was beginning to subside, tensions with the locals began to build. The fate of the birds was caught in the middle of a struggle between several different groups, all trying to help them. The locals, the SPCA, the World Parrot Refuge volunteers and staff were in a constant battle to save the birds, and in all this infighting, something was lost. Everyone wanted to save the birds, but there were just too many, and so they remained in danger. When Dr. McDonald and the Night Owl team stepped in, they met resistance from the locals and the SPCA. There was resentment for those that had the resources to help the birds. Conflict worsened to the point that the locals needed to be kept off the premise during the rescue. It's a shame that these factions fought against each other for a common goal. Politics and emotion muddied good intentions, and people forgot that it should have been all for the birds.
Yeah, it was a tremendously negative thing, but we just kept on saying it doesn't matter what happens here. All that matters is we get these birds looked after, because they were going to be looked after. because of all of the conflict that was going on.
Amid the difficulties with the locals, the Night Owl people maintained their focus on helping the birds. The rescue effort continued, and all of the birds were removed from the Coombs facility. The majority of the abandoned birds are currently being housed at a single facility in the heart of Vancouver, British Columbia.
I wonder, I think to myself, for the random person that's walking by, parking their car and going for lunch, do they have any idea what's behind those doors? Do they have any idea how powerful it is behind those doors? And the struggles, the struggles not just for us, but for every single bird that's in there.
The birds arrived at the Vancouver facility with a long list of health issues.
We have a lot of birds with aspergillosis. It's a fungal infection of the air sacs and lungs. We found parasites inside our cockatiel flocks. A lot of birds with fractures, bite wounds, self-mutilation, arthritis cases. They get really old, those birds, and they just didn't get the proper care that they probably would have needed.
All of these health issues required extensive treatment, and this has been costly in terms of time and finances. The financial burden of the rescue falls on the Greyhaven Exotic Bird Sanctuary and Dr. McDonald.
I think in the past year, it's cost about $1 million to run this project. Dr. McDonald actively, out of her own pocket today, spends about $6,000 a month, just out of her own pocket, that she'll never see again. And she does it because she cares.
With a combination of better conditions, medication, and a whole lot of love, the medical cases have decreased significantly.
The medical cases in general have really drastically dropped. When we came in, every bird was a medical case.
A lot of the birds that we have treated for this and that have really done spectacularly well and amazingly well. And across the board, that's been true. But now we're seeing birds that, that have they're not, they've been treated, they've made a good response, but they're not coming right back to where you'd want them to be. And so now I think we're beginning to realize that some of these birds have been chronically damaged and may not live a long time.
I actually am fostering a bird right now with terminal cancer. He's a really friendly bird, and he came to our care too, very, very skinny. And then we saw that his upper legs are completely osteolyzed, which means they just kind of dissolved. They're dissolved looking. And then his right knee was completely destroyed. The integrity wasn't even there anymore. And then we decided to do a fine needle aspirate, and it came back positive for a neoplasia. So it's a tumor, and apparently also it's a metastasis. So it's actually not the primary tumor. The primary tumor sits somewhere else, and it's just spread to the bones. And he's so skinny. He lost weight, and probably due because he was either not able to reach the food, or maybe they didn't even want to eat because of their pain. So he has a terminal illness, and we decided that we have to give him a home right now, away from all the birds and away from the stress, because we just don't know how long we will have him, and he's such a sweet bird. So we just want to make sure that he has now a nice life.
Seeing these birds that that we've spent endless amount of energy and time into, and realizing that maybe we can't do anything more for them. Maybe we can't get them past the point of having that fractured leg that healed badly and everything, all of the complications from it. So I think there's an element of, at least I personally am feeling an element of sadness about it all too. But anyway, illness is a part of life. It's just awful to see it on such a vast front.
In spite of all of the grief and sadness, the Night Owl staff and volunteers have maintained an impossibly positive attitude.
I've learned that we can change the lives of these birds. We've watched birds come in that were very aggressive, and now they're just little butterballs. They just melt in everything that they're doing, and they trust you, and they look at you, and they know that they're safe.
The birds needed to learn to trust, And the interesting thing was that when they started to trust, that's when they used to lay their head against our chests and just cuddle up and, just want to be loved. And in a way, they were kind of just surrendering.
Because birds are so intelligent, because they are so emotional and connected to people, you kind of saw that lost look in their eyes. And for me, that was the hardest part, because they're all individuals, and they all have feelings, and they all are experiencing something that they don't understand. They'll tell you their stories themselves, and I think that they're amazing. They're amazing stories, and where they've been and the things that they've experienced, people would have no idea.
There is a bird rescued from the refuge with an interesting quirk. This bird makes the sound of a hospital respirator. From this, we can infer some aspects of her life. As the bird's previous owner aged, their health degraded, which led them to require a respirator. During the time the owner was on a respirator, the bird acquired the noise so that she could echo the respiration in some hopeful form of communication. The bird bonded so strongly to her owner that after the owner passed away and the bird was sent to the refuge for an unknown amount of time, she has retained the respirator sounds to this day, and she is still forced to relive the passing of her owner in the sound of the respirator.
You realize they had a human relationship before they went to the facility, and they're really longing for that.
And they were just like dying for that human contact, and you could tell that they had been raised by a human, and they had once been attached to a person, and then it was just really hard to see them then. So they're taken out of this good home, maybe, with this bond with this person, and then they're put into this terrible situation with other birds that are attacking them, fighting. They no longer have that person that they're bonded to. And I think I don't really know how else to explain it other than like abandoning your 2-year-old child.
This is Nikki Montgomery's living room. In a staggering act of commitment to the rescue, Nikki has volunteered to foster 38 African gray birds. Today, Nikki and her husband hosts an event called Meet the Grays to build awareness and to give the public a chance to meet some sweet animals. Like humans, all these birds have different personalities. Easy G loves to swing and picks locks. Callie sings like a police siren when saying hello. Fluffy is still learning to trust. Buster and Teresa are a couple, and they like being next to each other. This is Vaso and Dante. Dante, on the right, stands on one foot because he is missing several toes on that foot and cannot grip the perch properly. When asked about fostering so many parrots, Nikki had this to say.
I've learned that if my house is loud enough, that the children will move out.
A simple question haunted me while I learned about the rescue. Why does it matter that they're birds?
So we have received very little help so far from the SPCA. And so one would have to say, if you suddenly were faced with 589 dogs to find homes with, would they be saying to you, well, you're on your own, basically? Would they be saying that to you? I don't think so. Because, when a kennel with 39 dogs goes into dysfunction, it's a hue and cry to get those dogs looked after. What if it were 589 dogs? Would the SPCA be able to say, okay, we're not going to help you with this?
If this had happened to dogs or cats, it would have been, everybody would be talking about it. With those birds, nobody's talking about it. I don't think they really know that birds have a personality, and especially due to their age, they've been through a lot. They've seen a lot in their lives. If a bird can get 50 years old, and they're really smart, they can interact with us, they can tell us their name. We have a lot of birds that we renamed, and then they just showed us a week later, and my name is so and so. My name is Bird, although we call him Curie.
These birds, these sweet, intelligent creatures, are not here of their own volition. The survivors of the World Parrot Refuge are victims of society's short attention span.
And I'm sure certain people thought, oh, it'd be so cool to have this beautiful macaw show up to my friends. 3 years later, all the friends and family have seen the bird. The novelty's worn off. Now it's just a noisy, messy creature. I'll get rid of it.
It's so important, it's so important to know that we've brought them here. As humans, we've smuggled them into this country, and we've bred them, and we've exhausted the whole thing. And at the end of the day, we're bored of you now, so off to the facility you go, But if people could really understand that, yes, the birds are here now, we need to love them, but we need to stop the process of breeding. We need to stop the process of bringing more birds that are wild into our homes and into cages. If I could reach out to people and ask them not to buy birds from pet stores, not to buy birds from breeders, let those people kind of let their business dry up and love the birds that are here now, but stop the breeding.
My macaw I'm sure she doesn't even know how to fly. She's never really been able to try. She's never really learned. She became sick, she had pneumonia, and now I don't even know if she has the lung capacity to ever fly, which is sad. It's sad because flight is a huge thing for birds. However, you kind of deal with what's happening, right? I still love her. She's great. She's doing fine now, but in general, she shouldn't be in my house. But they still need love. We still have to love the ones that are here.
What happens to these discarded pets?
We still do even get some cases in at night owl. Birds that have just been abandoned. Animal control will have to go in and essentially rescue them and then bring them to us. So it's still happening.
Birds that are too loud that are shoved into garden sheds and left there over the winter. Who knows if they're being fed or watered or anything, because I don't know, maybe the owner is not comfortable reaching out for help. But when it comes to birds, there's always that worry of neglect too, right? So
it's so sad because they're so smart. They don't take it lightly. I think emotionally they become quite damaged. They're like little, I guess, 2-year-olds, maybe even older, and I feel like they truly do have the capacity to really understand and to really feel pain and sadness, and it's just, people underestimate how much it affects them, but they're like people. They really are.
Birds that get displaced from home to home can acquire negative habits like feather picking and screaming. Nobody wants to be displaced from their family. I was saddened to learn that the problem of the discarded pet extends far beyond the birds in the World Parrot Refuge. displaced birds are common in our society.
That there is this whole second-hand market of unwanted birds. In this case, it all comes from one facility. But our public is, we do not have a bird-owning public that keeps birds for a long time. And so they tend to be a recycled product. And it's really unfortunate for the birds.
These birds live so long that they can often outlive their owners. Unless the owners have a succession plan, the birds end up getting recycled. The World Parrot Refuge was a giant recycling plant, storage for the recycled birds. And Wendy Huntsback passed away without a succession plan for the refuge birds in the exact same way as many bird owners before her. It's just a difference in scale.
We've come a long way, but again, it takes time because we don't want it to end up in the same spot we started in, right? They need good homes, they need educated owners, they know, I mean, a lot of these birds aren't healthy. It's going to be ongoing medical needs.
So the adoptions part of it is the slowest part of it. But I think if the public can be made more aware that if they really want a bird, and maybe they want to look at getting a bird that's already an adult, that has its established behaviors, but that may not, maybe it's halfway through its life or longer than, or more than that, that's a very good way of getting a pet, that you can make a huge contribution to their well-being and get back an endless amount of reward for it too, without having to go and get a baby, to encourage this whole thing to recycle again.
Our main goal is to get them into the homes where they have that one-on-one and they really get that chance to hear their own voice and that chance to bond with their own flock and their own people.
I think that's been one of the most reassuring things about this whole thing is that, my goodness, there are a lot of good people out there who are, they're just open to taking this bird. We'll take this bird for however long it has, and during the time we have it, we'll do our best to provide what we can for housing and medical care.
If I could ask the average person to take the time to spend with a bird, before you decide to adopt, go to a local rescue, hold the hand of a bird, look at a bird in its eyes and really understand what's going on in their little minds, and ask yourself if it's something that you can enrich their life by adopting them. And even if you decide that, even if you're someone that's not looking to adopt, to give that time to those birds in these rescues and in these shelters.
A lot of these birds are traumatized, and it just takes a long time for them to really trust again. And I know when I was working at the shelter, it took me months before they trusted. And I think when you adopt a bird, you have to be committed and realize that it's not going to be easy and that it takes a long time for that trust to develop. But when they give it, you will be totally overwhelmed and just in love with that bird.
Without funds in place, without a plan for the future of the birds, the refuge should not have been allowed to grow to the size it did. It was incredibly irresponsible and akin to skydiving without a parachute and 1,000 little lives in tow.
But to have a facility with over 1,000 birds in it fail, and to have them like, oh yeah, so what happens now? I think it could be handled better. And I think that licensing any facility that has a vast number or a moderate number of animals, I think some sort of financial security should be part of the licensing.
You can't have this type of facility. You can't run this type of refuge with this many birds. It's impossible. And I hope that it just doesn't happen anywhere else in the world. I've learned how to stay positive. I think that this whole thing was just sad. That's the best way I can put it. Every aspect, every angle is just sad to me. It was hard dealing with staff members, I think we were so overwhelmed at Night Owl. I think every day one of the staff members would go home crying, and it was just really hard. But you know, as hard as it was, and I think it was like the most stressed I'd ever been in my entire life, to see it now, to have people coming back for their rechecks with their new bird adoptions from the refuge, and see how they're thriving, and hearing their stories, and how the birds really come out of their shell and they actually talk and they're so nice, and it's just like, it just means everything. It just makes it all worth it.
While learning about the World Parrot Refuge rescue, I spent a lot of time with the Night Owl staff and volunteers. I heard one phrase many times. Whenever the work got difficult, whenever someone was feeling physically or emotionally exhausted, a mantra was uttered. It's all for the birds. The people I spoke to put away their grief and contributed their time and love for the birds. It was, is, and will continue to be all for the birds.
He rocks in the treetop all the day long, hopping and a bopping and a singing his song. All the little birds on Jaybird Street look to hear the robin go tweet, tweet, tweet. Rockin' Robin, tweet, tweet. Rock, rock, rockin' Robin.